Hello, it is Tuesday, the 4th of February. I'm Pete Dominick. This is Stand Up. My very special guest today is Dahlia Lithwick of Slate. She is an author, she is a commentator, and she is one of the most widely respected constitutional law scholars ever living, and we love her. She joins me today at 30 minutes into the show. But I've got your headlines and clips as I do every day, and thank you to everybody who joined us at last night's hangout. We were there for, I think, almost 3 hours on a Monday night. It was a lot of fun, and very serious conversations in the first hour and a half or so. But I think the second half was like the fun half. And we had a great time. You can go relive all of it right now. There's a link for all paid subscribers to watch that Zoom, and I highly recommend it. Also, our friend Kevin Richburg has about 10 or 12 jars of honey left. Go to Slate Hill Edible Farms. Thanks to everybody who has bought his honey. It is the very, very best. Go get the rest. And join us in Las Vegas for PODJAM at the end of March. Tickets are available. There's a link in the show notes, and those are all of the announcements here at the top. Let's get to the headlines from yesterday. Then I've got your clips and a great conversation with Dahlia Lithwick. Today's segment of the good stuff had to take a break because I didn't prepare anything really quality, and I don't want to half-ass it, but always stay mindful and in the moment and try to recognize the thoughts that you're thinking. Meditate, journal, exercise, get outside, call a friend, do something nice for someone. Those are all the things that help me feel a little bit better in the moment. That is your daily reminder for the good stuff. At least that's my practice, and I'm trying to keep that going. But yeah, sorry, I don't have anything special for you today. I had such a good time at last night's hangout. That was my good stuff for yesterday, and so now it's time to get to your headlines. For yesterday, of course, the big headline yesterday had everything to do with the trade war that started and then stopped and then continued again. President Trump and leaders of Mexico and Canada struck last-minute deals yesterday, completely unnecessary. They were already in the works. Some of the things had already been announced. It's just all a show. Postponed heavy tariffs that the U.S. planned to impose on goods to both countries. The agreements temporarily averted the North American trade war, although Canada seems pretty pissed off. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that afternoon that Trump had agreed to postpone tariffs against Canada for 30 days as the two countries negotiated a border deal. And then hours earlier, the president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, had announced a similar pause after agreeing to a series of U.S. demands on border security, including a promise to send 10,000 more troops to the border, even though there's already 15,000 there, apparently. The U.S. is also expected to prevent the trafficking of high-powered weapons into Mexico, which is a huge issue for them, and I'm sure we'll do nothing about it because Trump is the worst person ever at deal-making in that he doesn't make them. The last-minute maneuvering demonstrated Trump's willingness to use tariffs as leverage, the New York Times writes, against America's most important trading partners. Imports from Mexico, Canada, and China, another target of tariffs, account for more than a third of products brought into the U.S. each year, and Trump's levies against China did take effect. He said he was planning to soon discuss the tariffs with China's leader, Xi Jinping. That call is supposed to happen today, but the president described the 10% tariffs on Chinese imports as an opening salvo, and now he's going to tariff and threatened Europe. So all of our good friends, except for our enemies, he's doing far less to and making better friends with. The other big story yesterday was about USAID because the co-president, the real president, Elon Musk, declared yesterday that he and the president had agreed to shut down the foreign aid agency. Soon after, employees were told not to report to work. And by midday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio declared that he had taken over as acting administrator of the agency, which had largely been independent for decades. Senior officials have been suspended. Hundreds of civil servants and contractors have been iced out of USAID systems without warning. And Rubio says that many of the agency's programs would continue, but blamed the change on its workers' insubordination. What? More than 100 USAID employees gathered in front of the agency's headquarters in Washington with Democratic lawmakers to protest the moves. Democrats have denounced Musk's planned shutdown as illegal because Congress created and funds the agency as a distinct entity. I've got audio for you coming up on that. In other political news from Washington yesterday, the EPA told more than 1,100 employees that they could be fired at any time. Well, that's good. That must make them work really hard and make everything productive. The State Department fired about 60 contractors who worked for its Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor Bureau because Trump and his supporters don't care about democracy, human rights, or the labor movement. Marines and soldiers are preparing Guantanamo Bay to be the first detention camp, as many as 30,000 deported migrants are going to be living there, indefinitely, apparently. A judge said that she would further block the White House's plan to freeze trillions of dollars of federal grants and loans, so that is good. Trump said that he wanted Ukraine to supply the U.S. with its rare earth minerals in exchange for American aid, so all of our aid is not aid. It's actually a deal, and he wants something for it. In Panama, Marco Rubio demanded immediate changes to thwart China's control of the canal. That's in quotes. An atmospheric river could bring scattered flooding and snow to Northern California and an increased risk of mudslides to Southern California. And speaking of L.A., now, crews have to clean toxic debris from the wildfires before residents can rebuild, and some lots may be ready in days, but the whole process could take up to 18 months, according to another report. In New York, the Attorney General warned hospitals that complying with Trump's executive order to end gender-affirming care for transgender youth could violate New York state law, so that's going to create confusion for caregivers. At least 4 cases of measles, including 2 involving school-aged children, have been reported in Texas in less than 2 weeks. I'm sure we're going to see a lot more reports like that, putting state health agencies on alert. For some communities, this is the first time they've had measles in their community in more than 20 years. Thanks, RFK, who will probably be confirmed today as Health and Human Services Secretary. And the White House does have its priorities, by the way. Federal workers have been instructed to remove any reference to their identifying pronouns from their email signatures and other forms, as agency department leaders work to follow Trump's executive order to scrub all references to gender ideology and official government materials by this Friday. Oh, I forgot to mention this. A lot of attention being paid to this, and rightfully so. A former Trump speechwriter who was fired in 2018 after CNN revealed he spoke at a conference attended by white nationalists has now been rehired in this new administration and elevated to a top job at the State Department. His name is Darren Beatty. He was appointed to serve as the Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs, a role that is key and responsible for helping shape U.S. messaging abroad related to counterterrorism and violent extremism. After being ousted from the Trump White House, he founded the right-wing media outlet Revolver News, known for amplifying false conspiracies about the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, including allegations that federal agencies orchestrated aspects of the attack and controlled extremist groups involved in the attack. He's also made a series of racially charged comments. That's how CNN puts it. He's a racist. Writing in on one tweet last year, competent white men must be in charge if you want things to work. Unfortunately, our entire national ideology is predicted on coddling the feelings of women and minorities and demoralizing competent white men. He also praised Dr. James Watson, the founder of modern genetics, who later suggested black people were less intelligent than white people as the greatest living American scientist. He called him that. And he repeatedly said black lawmakers, policymakers, and groups need to, quote, learn their place and take a knee to MAGA. And there's a lot more where that came from. So this guy is a real horror show. And now he's got a really important job at the State Department on messaging. Sounds about white. And on that note, let's get to the audio, starting with Van Jones, who's talking about this guy on CNN yesterday.
Speaker to a white nationalist group.
Yeah, look, I mean, this is shameless and despicable. And it really, they are saying they only want quality. We've got to go with quality. We got to go with excellence. And then they bring in people out of the trash can. They just go drag out horrible people who you wouldn't hire to run a bodega and put them in the highest positions. And so it's the gaslighting of Americans, attacking black people, attacking brown people, saying we're not good enough. And then they go get the worst people ever born and put them in high positions. And so at some point, I think right now Americans are just shocked. People are saying, where are the protests? I think people are literally just shocked and can't believe it and having a hard time processing it. But at some point, you piss off enough people, you fire enough people, you pull the rug out from enough people, you shut down enough programs, and you start building up a big bank of people who are pissed off. And that is going to come.
Van Jones on CNN, like him or hate him. He's an old friend of mine. I haven't talked to him in a long time, but I thought that was a pretty good piece of commentary. All right, now let's get to Senator Chris Murphy, who, along with a whole bunch of other Democratic lawmakers and a bunch of folks from USAID, were standing in front of the agency's building in Washington, D.C. yesterday to have a impromptu press conference. And I thought it was great. I thought it was important. I'm glad that they did it. And there were a whole bunch of good speeches. I actually watched it while I was live yesterday. And I always love Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, even though I often call him Scott Murphy for whatever reason I can't explain. But here he is for about 3 minutes doing, I think, a real good job, even though I edited out a lot of the applause to get to the content. Sorry.
So Elon Musk has been floating all sorts of awful, terrible conspiracy theories about what happens at USAID. Let's make it very clear that every single day, America is safer because of what happens at USAID. USAID fights terrorist groups all across this world, making sure that we address the underlying causes for a retreat to terrorism. USAID chases China all around the world, making sure that China doesn't monopolize contracts for critical minerals and port infrastructure all around the world. It supports freedom fighters everywhere in this world. Up until yesterday, delivering firewood, for instance, to the brave Ukrainian defenders on the Eastern Front. But let's not pull any punches about why this is happening. Elon Musk makes billions of dollars based off of his business with China. And China is cheering at this action today. There is no question that the billionaire class trying to take over our government right now is doing it based on self-interest. Their belief that if they can make us weaker in the world, if they can elevate their business partners all around the world, that they will gain the benefit. But there's another reason this is happening. They're shuttering agencies and sending employees home in order to create the illusion that they're saving money in order to do what? Pass a giant tax cut for billionaires and corporations, right? This is all a smokescreen, a shell game, in order to turn this government over to a handful of unelected billionaires and corporate interests, and we are not going to let them do that. So we will use every power that we have in our disposal in the United States Senate. My colleagues will do the same thing in the House. This is a constitutional crisis that we are in today. Let's call it what it is. The people get to decide how we defend the United States of America. The people get to decide how their taxpayer money is spent. Elon Musk does not get to decide. We are weaker today than we were yesterday. China sees that, Russia sees that, and they will take advantage. Our job and your job together is to raise our voices, raise the alarm, so that this crisis, this emboldening of our enemies, doesn't last a second longer than it has to. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Really, really important.
All right. That was Senator Chris Murphy yesterday. Also, Jamie Raskin. Let's play a little bit of Jamie Raskin at the same press conference.
And just like Elon Musk did not create USAID, he doesn't have the power to destroy it. And who's going to stop him? We are. We're going to stop him. Elon Musk, you may have illegally seized power over the financial payment systems of the United States Department of Treasury, but you don't control the money of the American people. The United States Congress does that under Article 1 of the Constitution. And just like the president who is elected to something cannot impound the money of the people, we don't have a fourth branch of government called Elon Musk. And that's going to become real clear.
All right, Jamie Raskin and Senator Chris Murphy and a whole bunch of other Democratic lawmakers yesterday in front of USAID agency's building. Jon Stewart does not like Chuck Schumer, and neither do I, frankly. I think he's a terrible communicator, and I'm not sure how good of a leader he is. But here is Jon Stewart hosting The Daily Show last night, begging Democrats to stop trotting Chuck Schumer out in public.
But President Trump, this trade war has awoken a sleeping giant. Not Canada, not Mexico, but the Democratic minority Senate leader. Release the Schumer!
It's going to affect beer, okay? Most of it, Corona here, comes from Mexico. It's going to affect your guac, because what is guacamole made of? Avocados.
Your response to the trade war is to tell us guacamole is made of avocados? Is that what?
When the people find out the precious Super Bowl dip is comprised of mainly avocado, also tomato, sometimes onion, it's a bit much for me, obviously, with the spilkis and...
Excuse me one second. Democrats, can you please stop trotting Schumer out there every time Trump traverses into the unreal? He's not good at this. What is the decision-making process here? Hey, who should we get out there to effectively battle one of the most savvy presidential media manipulators in history? Oh, I don't know. How about Schumer? He's uninteresting, but at least he's monotone. Oh, wait. And Chuck, before you go out there, you look too young. Put on these readers and lower them on your nose. Perfect. Honestly, listening to Chuck Schumer speak on almost any topic makes me want to bomb Canada.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with the great Jon Stewart hosting The Daily Show on Monday nights. There it is. And speaking of Chuck Schumer, speaking of Chucks, here's Chuck Todd. How about that for a segue? Chuck Todd just absolutely going ballistic on Chris Cillizza's podcast. I guess I don't know exactly what this is. Both of them had been forced out of their corporate media jobs, but they're talking now. I guess they must be old friends. And I agree with everything Chuck Todd says here.
And if democracy is a quote-unquote left-wing ideology to Elon Musk, I mean, this man is un-American as far as my definition of America is. And I'm the fact that more people aren't offended by this man's actions. I mean, shows you how much he has helped successfully destroy the trusted information ecosystem, because this is a 5-alarm fire. Elon Musk is a 5-alarm fire, and the country doesn't realize it yet.
Yeah, well, maybe some of us do. And Jay Inslee is the governor of Washington, and I thought this was great. I thought that listen closely to what Jay Inslee is saying here, because I think we're ready. I think we have mourned enough, and people are scared and getting activated all over the country and getting organized all over the country. Here's who's always great, Jay Inslee on MSNBC.
The days of grieving of the Democratic Party are over. I'm officially, by executive order, declaring those days of depression and passivity and sort of play footsie with Donald Trump. Those days are over. We're not going to do that anymore. And if you're listening to this show and you're understanding the outrages that are going on, this is the day for you to, call League of Conservation Voters and give them a hand, or Planned Parenthood, or some other entity, and call a Republican congressman and give them holy hell for what they're doing here. But now is the time to get up there on our hind legs and confront this guy every single place we can. And frankly, my party's been just a little bit too passive and quiet in this regard. I'm sensing we've woken up in the last 24 hours. You hear the voices of Senator Patty Murray, who's fighting this. You're seeing our Attorney General, that's the first in the nation to get an injunction against this effort to take away birthright citizenship, which is clearly unconstitutional. I think you're seeing an awakening of a sleeping giant here, and we got to keep that giant active.
Yeah, well, I don't think that should be very hard. And in Canada, that giant is wide awake. I'll be talking to a couple of Canadians this week. Ophira Eisenberg is going to join me, and Carlos suggested I reach out to this guy named Dean Blundell, who I've booked as well. But here is a Canadian. His name is Bob Rae. He is he is Canada's ambassador to the United Nations. And Brett Baer had him on Fox News yesterday and thought he was going to catch him in some kind of a weird gotcha moment, but he didn't. And Bob Rae holds the ground, holds the line. Here he is.
Mr. Ambassador, has your opinion of President Trump changed from when he first came to office in 2016, 2017?
My personal opinion? No, it hasn't changed.
Yeah. Because you wrote in 2017 that the determination of many world leaders to try to normalize this leadership has to be brought to ground. He should not be welcome in our country. Speaking about not welcoming the President of the United States to Canada.
Well, first of all, I made that comment when I was in private life. We've all said different things in private life. But if you said, has my opinion overall changed, I would say to you very directly that the concern that I think all Canadians have, it's not a personal thing about President Trump. The concern we have is that we don't want the administration making and taking decisions that are going to create insecurity, uncertainty, and real collapses in the market in a way that's quite arbitrary. Yeah. And that's why we're trying to have a reasonable and sensible discussion, and that's the kind of discussion
I appreciate
we'd like to have, and one that's respectful. And by the way, we're not the 51st state. We're a sovereign, independent country. Our leader deserves to be treated with respect, and we deserve to be treated with respect, and that's the way we want to proceed.
Yeah. So the, quote, trade war might be over, at least for the moment, but Canadians are pissed, and that's not going away. We've heard them booing the national anthem, the American national anthem at Canadian hockey games, and removing American products, and they're mad, and that just doesn't just end, apparently. So we'll learn more about that. Also, here is Republican right-wing conspiracy theorist Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin on the right-wing Newsmax channel, saying he's not on board with the trade war. He doesn't think it's going to be effective. This is, again, a right-wing senator on a right-wing channel.
But in general, tariffs are a tax. When you tax something, you get less of it. So we'll probably get fewer imports, but then with retaliation, fewer exports. Smoot-Hawley was not a particularly successful round of tariffs back, helped spark the Depression. So I share the market's concern in terms of, but we'll see what Trump really has in mind here. I know he used tariffs very effectively when Remain in Mexico wasn't working until Mexico started cooperating under the threat of tariffs. So again, I can't predict exactly how this comes up, but I'm concerned.
He's concerned. You know who else is concerned? Former Republican Congressman Charlie Dent telling the truth. I thought this was great. He makes a lot of very good points in this couple of minutes. So listen closely to what he has to say about USAID and more.
Well, let's start with it. What's happening at USAID, shuttering USAID, is an egregious abuse of executive authority. Full stop. Elon Musk doesn't have the authority to shut it down. And by the way, his role, I thought, was advisory, to give the president advice. That's fine. Give him advice. But this is an operational role to shut down USAID. And they do a lot of very important humanitarian work around this world. Congress appropriated money for this agency. And it's the executive's job to carry out that order. I mean, when Congress passes a spending bill, an appropriations bill becomes law, that's not a suggestion. They're not giving advice to the president. It's a command. They're telling him how to spend the money. What's happening right now in the federal government is absolutely beyond anything I've ever seen. We're talking about a purge at the FBI, shuttering USAID, pardoning J6 criminals, launching a preemptive war against Canada and Mexico, Canada in the name of national security. Has anybody ever been to Normandy? The Canadian cemetery is right down the street from the American cemetery. They're not a threat. They're our dearest friends and allies. Reagan called them our kin, and we're treating them. We're insulting them. This is outrageous. But USAID, back to this, Congress has a role to play here. They are not a bystander in this. They're going to have to fund. Here's what's going to happen. March 14th, the government must be funded. Republicans will need a lot of Democrats to help them pass a funding bill. And I suspect Democrats are going to make a lot of demands, like making sure that the monies that have been appropriated be spent as designated or as ordered by Congress. So Republicans, I think, are under a lot of stress right now in the Congress. There's a lot of heartburn, and I'm just waiting for the dam to break. I think a number of them are going to have to speak out forcefully on this.
Yeah, well, we'll see about that. Okay, so it is February, and that means it's Black History Month. While the federal government is trying to cancel it, states and organizations around the country are continuing, obviously, to celebrate it. And I thought it would be interesting to get a little lesson from one of America's top professors, Henry Louis Gates Jr., Professor Skip Gates. Here he is talking about this video was titled Reconstruction, Devote Black History in 2 minutes or so.
Most of us know our country fought a civil war in the 1860s. But less is known about what came afterward, the chaotic, exhilarating, and ultimately devastating period known as Reconstruction. It was a moment of profound change, with promises of citizenship and equal rights for all. One of the greatest achievements of Reconstruction was granting black men the right to vote. In 1867 alone, over 80% of all the black men in the former Confederate states registered to vote. 3 years later, Hiram Revels was elected the first black man to serve in the United States Senate, and Joseph Rainey became the first black United States congressman. Their election paved the way for more than 2,000 black office holders who served at every level of government during Reconstruction.
There are not many moments in recorded human history where a group that was so subordinated would, within the space of a decade, actually be integrated into the highest echelons of political society.
But the momentum wouldn't last. Black men's access to the ballot box, along with other key rights gained during Reconstruction, were rolled back systematically throughout the South. In 1875, near the end of Reconstruction, the 44th Congress included 7 black House members and a United States Senator. By 1900, only 1 remained, Congressman George Henry White of North Carolina.
By the time George H. White leaves office in 1901, he literally turns the light off on national black political leadership. No one will come behind him for an entire generation.
One of the cruel ironies of Reconstruction is that black people could claim certain rights in the 1870s that they would have to fight to reclaim in the 1960s. A sobering reminder that achievements thought permanent can be overturned and rights can never be taken for granted.
Yes, there you go. A little bit of black history for you that most Americans have very little understanding about because it wasn't really taught, and it should be. All right, let's get to some laughs, shall we? Here is Stephen Colbert last night, CBS, The Late Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, the thing we were worried about happened this weekend. An overweight, beady-eyed, ignorant dictator just ruined our future. Of course, I'm talking about Punxsutawney Phil. 6 more weeks of winter? I'm not sure we've got 6 more weeks because Donald Trump is doing so many stupidly bad things, so badly stupidly, that it's difficult to keep up. Anyone who's ever had a toddler knows this feeling. You leave the room for 1 second, and when you come back, everything from the bookshelves is on the floor, the walls are covered in ketchup, and when you ask who gave the dog a haircut with safety scissors, your kid says, it was DEI. It's hard to know what to start with. Each and every one of Trump's disastrous moves deserves top billing. It's like there's a long deli line, at the counter of incompetence and corruption. And every ticket coming out of that little machine says number 1. I'll give you a taste, okay? Over the weekend, Trump and his people gave Elon Musk access to the Treasury's payment system, prepared to shut down USAID, threatened to take back the Panama Canal, fired DOJ prosecutors who worked on January 6th, had the Pentagon kick out the New York Times, NBC, and NPR in favor of the New York Post, Breitbart, and One America News, blocked federal agencies from honoring Black History Month, MLK Day, Juneteenth, Pride Month, and Holocaust Remembrance Day. removed over 1,000 studies from the CDC website and took down thousands of government web pages to satisfy Trump's orders to remove topics like diversity initiatives and gender ideology. Folks, America's golden age must have a browser history, not a browser they-them story. We will also be getting rid of all the State Department's translators. We will replace them with manslaters. No mom and dad wants to send their beautiful English word to school and have it come back German, okay?
All right, Colbert on CBS last night. Those are the laughs. And now it's time to get to my excellent guest, who is one of the most widely respected commentators when it comes to, well, a whole range of issues, including, obviously, the Supreme Court. You can hear her and read her over at slate.com. Her podcast is Amicus. It's so good. She's a regular contributor to MSNBC, New York Times, The New Yorker, and every respected journalism outlet out there. She got it. She's just so smart, brilliant, and a fun, down-to-earth, really cool person. Her book is so good, too. You've got to get her book, which has been out just a little over a year, I think. Lady Justice, Women, the Law, and the Battle to Save America. Actually, no, it's been out longer than that, but it's more relevant than ever before, probably. So get that book, Lady Justice, right now. Listen to her podcast. Support her on social media. Here it is, ladies and gentlemen. All right. I've got her, and we're really excited that we do, because who would you want to talk to as we circle the drain more than one of the smartest people I know, Dahlia Lithwick. Hi, great to see you.
Hi, Pete. What a fun coup we're having.
This is what are we calling this? Is it a billionaire grift? Is it a coup? Is it an authoritarian takeover? Is it a constitutional crisis? Terminology seems to matter.
Mark Joseph Stern and I are just this, as we speak, filing a piece calling it an auto coup, which has that fancy Spanish name that I can't pronounce. I think it's a self coup, closer to, it's also, this is what a corporate takeover, right? This is exactly how a corporate takeover happens. So if you think of it in that context, maybe that helps. But I think formally speaking, and this is actually important, and your friend Eric Segall, I think, would have my back on this. A constitutional crisis has a really, as a term of art, has a really formal definition, which is when two entities that are supposed to be checking and balancing each other are at a logjam, right? So when the court says no and the president does it anyway, or Congress says no and the president does, that's actually a constitutional crisis. That's like sending the National Guard out to Brown v. Board, right? So this feels like it's not exactly that, because the president seems to have the Congress, at least, backing him up. I think actually in the next 24 hours or so, as courts start to enjoin the stuff that's happening on Capitol Hill right now, I think that actually will tilt into a constitutional crisis when you have courts that are saying, no, you can't do this. And we've already got courts on last week saying all of that nonsense with the impoundment is unlawful. I think then it's a constitutional crisis. I think up until now, it's been some version of a self coup where some strongman gets into power and then hollows out checks and balances from within.
When the courts enjoin me to stop whatever action that the executive branch or Trump is taking by executive order. That's what I think that means. But the most obvious thing to me seemed, and you wrote about this, Trump's birthright citizenship, executive order. A court stopped that, at least temporarily. But if you don't know what a corporate takeover is or a constitutional crisis is, you do know just about the 14th Amendment, the Constitution, and birthright citizenship. Most people at least do know. And he just inviolated. He just said no more. To me, starting there, much less going to whether or not Congress has the power of the purse, but just how can these things happen and why do they happen and how much chaos does that create?
They happen when you have a president who genuinely believes, and we can thank John Roberts and the Supreme Court because they bolstered this belief, that he is above the law, right? This is a president who genuinely believes that the Congress and the courts are subordinate to him, and that the Constitution means what he says it means, Pete. And so even though the 14th Amendment expressly protects birthright citizenship by design, right? If you're an originalist, you know that this is what it was meant to do. So to say, oh, actually, we've been getting it wrong this whole time, and I just choose to like take my Sharpie and strike through it like it's a line item veto. Yes, that is the function of a president who genuinely believes. And by the way, everything that we are seeing at OPM, everything that we are seeing right now at the Treasury, what's happening with Elon Musk's little musketeers is his little 20-year-old.
There's like 6 guys, but they've identified their names. They're young guys. Yeah, go ahead.
Silicon Valley babies, like high school graduates. And if you think about that, every one of them is also operating in violation of a statute or a rule so I think the idea simply is we're going to just break all the rules until someone stops us. Right? That's what the birthright citizenship order is. And as you say, a judge has stopped them, a Reagan judge. The first week out was like, no. And if they go ahead, there was a 30-day period before they were going to start denying birthright citizenship. If they go ahead and do it, you are exactly right. We are in a constitutional crisis.
You mentioned Eric Segall. I told him that I was going to talk to you, and he texted me, awesome, say hi to me. And I asked him for a question. Pop it. He said, say hi for me, and then a bunch of other things that he wanted to say to me. I'm like, no, I'm not going to say all those things. Then he writes, I ask her, I think the immunity opinion, which no one saw coming, is because John Roberts is afraid of Donald Trump. Do you have a better explanation at all for that, why he decided on that decision?
So I am in the basket of people that includes Eric that was surprised by the immunity decision, because not only did they, for the first time ever in history, grant the president immunity from criminal acts, they did it in the most maximalist way, right? There were ways, and Amy Coney Barrett wrote a concurrence that suggested one way that they could have narrowed this, but John Roberts was like, swing for the fences, Mr. President, whatever you say, with very few constraints. And so I think there's a couple of theories about why. I think my best theory is if you like drain all the blood out of the entire conflict and just look at it as a question of John Roberts as a person who always had a really capacious view of executive power, right? The president, he's been writing stuff like that for decades and he believes it. And so does the conservative legal movement. You can make a quasi-plausible argument that this was just like John Roberts' dream come true, right? To have this unbelievably broad swath of powers that you confer on the executive. And I think that's the kind of, if you want to do bloodless doctrine, I think that's the defense. It's hard to see, even if you want to do broad executive powers, why you would immunize the president from committing acts under some like complete crackpot theory that you don't want him to be too scared to do his job. Right? You don't want to chill him from acting boldly. This guy. So I guess Eric's theory, which is that he's afraid of something in Donald Trump, is as plausible as the next theory. I genuinely believe that they, and I don't know how, I was the person, Pete, saying, and I may have even said it on your show a year ago, I genuinely did not think that John Roberts was a big fan of Donald Trump. I don't think that Amy Coney Barrett is a big fan. I don't think they're big fans of coups and of lawlessness. But I guess I just think they may not have anticipated that this was going to be Viktor Orban's Hungary playbook. And I'm not sure they saw it coming. I think it might be less afraid of Donald Trump and more like, y'all need to get out more.
The reason why that question I feel like is relevant is because all of you scholars and smart people who are often very right about the analysis, the arguments, when you hear them, this is going to continue to come up. Where will the Supreme Court decide on all of these challenges? Will they all reach the Supreme Court, from birthright citizenship to whether or not Congress has the power of the purse, or whether or not you could just shut down USAID unilaterally? Do all those things end up at the Supreme Court? And do we find ourselves with the same makeup basically as we did on immunity?
I think you're asking what I think is like structurally one of the most important questions that hasn't gotten a lot of airtime, which is there's no way that the Supreme Court, as it is currently constituted, right, that hears like a couple dozen cases a year, can possibly hear every single executive order, of which there are dozens already, right? So one of the just structural problems is when you kick up this much mayhem, the court actually can't hear every one of these cases. And that may be good, may be bad, because if the court is going to rubber stamp everything Trump does, maybe it's good that some of them die out in the appeals courts.
But I was going to say, but the lower courts can, the appeals courts can, so they could stop them, and then they might not then make it to Supreme Court. Is that what I'm hearing you say? Or
they make it next year, or it's just the court used to hear 180 cases a year, and now they barely hear 70. So it's hard to imagine when you've got literally every day 6 orders coming out, how they're going to do it. On your other question of what is the court going to do, I think I want to say 2 things, and one of them is a bit meta, so I'll save it for the second. The first thing is, I think that having just said that John Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett they're not nihilists, right? I don't think they are Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas. I don't think they have Neil Gorsuch's fundamental desire to drown all of federal government in the bathtub. I think they're more, it breaks my heart to say that these are the center of the court, because they're radical right-wing operatives who were put on the court by the conservative legal movement. But I think it's fair to say there are probably not 5 votes for birthright citizenship, to do away with birthright citizenship. There are probably not 5 votes to say that centuries of doctrine on impoundment, right? The president saying, I don't care if Congress controls the purse strings. I don't care if Congress appropriated funds. I'm the big boy and we're turning off the spigot. I don't think there are 5 votes for that. So I don't know that all of this, the worst nihilist damaging stuff is going to get 5 votes at the court. But the second thing, and this is almost more important, and I really want to say it because I've been thinking it all weekend. In most authoritarian takeovers, and we see this in Hungary, we see this in Turkey. I had an amazing expert, Kim Lane Shepley, on my podcast Amicus on the weekend, and she makes the point that in almost all of those takeovers, you get elected once reasonably fairly, which is what happened, and then you hollow out the courts, right? Then you destroy the courts, then you destroy Congress, then you destroy the media. That's the play. We're in a weird posture, Pete, because the court, in some sense, was already taken over, right? The court was taken over when it decided Citizens United, when it decided Shelby County, when it hollowed out voting in America. In some sense, the court...
Before Trump's first term, the court was already captured by right-wing interests, Federalist Society, et cetera. And yeah.
And so this is a decades-long project that kind of culminates where you began, which is that the court then gives Trump the presidency, right? They slow walk the immunity decision and then they immunize him. So it's not possible to hear the case before the election. So I think it's really always going to be useful as we sit here saying, oh, maybe the court will save us. Maybe the court's going to buff off the worst edges of this, to really remember the court created this. The court gave us Donald Trump. And here's the last thing I'll say, but it's really important. Remember, there were 3 iterations of the travel ban, right? The travel ban, 2.0, 3.0, the 3.0. The court,
the
Muslim ban in 2017.
Yeah.
So the court sometimes serves to burnish something that is lawless, right? And then the country looks around and says, if the Supreme Court said that 3rd Muslim ban is constitutional, I guess it's constitutional. So watch for falling into the trap of saying that a captured court is going to save us. The captured court created this in the first instance. And if and when, and this is what really I have been thinking about all weekend, if and when the U.S. Supreme Court blesses some version of Donald Trump's birthright citizenship argument, blesses some in the 4.0 iteration, when they're like, okay, we're going to just say that only this class of children born in the United States to non-American parents have to self-deport, be really careful of saying that's constitutional because the court said it was.
Very important point. I really appreciate you explaining that because it's so important. So as you look at this, it's different than how most of us look at it, because you're an expert in many ways on what government can do legally and so on. And you're as exasperated and as connected to this emotionally as anybody else as well. And I wonder how you think about what is being done and what can be done, whether it be around the confirmation hearings. It seems like everybody I've heard talk about this that I respect says there's really not a lot Democrats can do because they don't have majorities in the House or Senate. There's not a lot they can do to slow these things down, much less lead investigations. Are you seeing anything that Democrats can do outside of stand outside in front of AID and start screaming and trying to compel people to care and get out in the streets or whatever, boycott this or that, which I don't see happening?
So I think you're asking two slightly different questions. One is, what can Americans do about the court? And I think the answer to that question is like invent a DeLorean, go back to the first term, the first Biden, when we could go back and actually do something, right? I think we're cooked. As far as I'm concerned, like for the foreseeable future, this is the court that we live with. And it is a court that is both emboldened because it thinks it's right, and it is pissed off and angry because we keep trying to figure out who's paying for Samuel Alito's fishing trips and Clarence Thomas's
right. We know, don't we?
Luxury camper. So they're mad. So I don't think the courts, as I said, are going to be fixed anytime soon. And I think the thing we have to do about that is be really not credulous, is to be incredibly principled about watching what they're doing and not falling for the kind of balls and strikes, we're gods in black robes bullshit. That's what we do about the court, as best as I can tell, is just stop saying they're like 9 oracles because they wear robes.
Right.
What Americans can do about what's going on now is, listen, everybody I know is on fire trying to figure that out. And I think we can agree that congressional Democrats have taken a long time to figure out how to meet the moment, and putting out tweets that are like, impoundment is unconstitutional is not, like, describing the problem in a tweet is not in fact taking action. Right. So I think it is heartening Monday morning to see a lot more happening there. There are also tons of lawsuits being filed as we speak, right, on all of these issues by amazing people who are saying like, no, you can't like illegally fire half of the Justice Department. There are statutes that protect career officials from being summarily dismissed. So lawsuits are happening. Here's the thing, and I'm just going to absolutely parrot what Professor Shepley from Princeton told me. And as I said, she has lived through this in Hungary and documented it. What she said is that our job is to create friction. Our job is to throw sand in every gear we can throw sand in. And if that means like standing in front of the Treasury, then that's what it means. If it means refusing when they fire you and say, leave the building, saying no, like you can't make me go. It means, I hate to say it, talking to reporters like you and me. We're conferring like lots of anonymity, but like talking to reporters so that we can understand what's going on and what the stakes are. But it's just friction. We know that as Poland has tried to claw back from autocracy, what's making the difference is people putting their bodies in it. And this is the Tim Snyder stuff. And people, if you haven't read Tim Snyder and Ruth Ben-Ghiat and Rebecca Solnit, like there are playbooks for what you do. But I think the operative theory is don't be passive. Don't say it's all too much, I'm going to target. And don't say there is like some big brain who's doing this so I don't have to. The big brains are freaking out. Take my word for it.
Yeah, we've got to go. I've almost got to go because I've got to get to Target. But what are the organizations that, would you mention the organizations that are filing these lawsuits? I think I know a couple, but another good thing you could do, I feel like, is donate to these organizations. Require a lot of lawyers and more apparently experts to file these lawsuits, right?
Yes. So the things that I am directing people to do are twofold. One is read and listen to good independent journalism like this show, like Slate, if you would, like the Amicus podcast. Listen to what the folks are doing at The Bulwark and The Contrarian and ProPublica and Talking Points Memo and the Center for Investigative Reporting and Public Notice, right? There's so much good independent journalism. So if you canceled your subscription to the Washington Post or the LA Times or the New York Times in fury, that's fine. But it means you have to subscribe to other things and you have to read them. And so that's one thing that I think is essential, that we need an information ecosystem that we can trust again.
Yes.
In terms of supporting organizations, and I'm not going to get all of them, please don't be angry. I think the single most important thing you can be doing is volunteering and signing up to help with groups like Protect Democracy, Lawyers for Good Government, Code for America, U.S. Digital Response, Partnership for Public Service. We're seeing so many, the ACLU is doing fantastic work. So I think that what I really want to tell people is, and this is like another lesson we have from Poland, is find something local. Your food bank is in crisis. Your library is in crisis. If people who depend on government for federal grants, they're in crisis. Universities in crisis, right? So a lot of this is going to be local. A lot of this is going to be finding things to do.
Yep, most important thing I've done is the school board stuff, and everybody's got a school board. So show up, write letters. There's not many people that show up. Sometimes there's nobody that shows up. Show up, write letters, make your voice heard at the school board.
100% local. And at the same time, like just knowing that there are so many projects that have been preparing this for years and years and who are showing up on a large scale just because they're invisible to us. Sign up for one of them and get their newsletters, and whatever they say is useful, do. I think like you just have to remember, and this is, I would end here, where Steve Bannon is like flood the zone with shit. Like we're in that, right? That's all this is. It's 1,000 things and nothing is more important or less important. It's all urgent, and it's not our job to do everything, but it's absolutely our job to do something.
Love it. Thank you for all the ideas. I'll put all those in the show notes, both the journalistic outfits and the nonprofits. You can find them in the show notes, the links to all of them. You're the greatest. I so appreciate you talking to me. Thank you very much. Keep up the great work, Dahlia.
Back at you, Pete. Thank you.
Forget the Target.
Target for everyone.
All right, there she goes, Dahlia Lithwick. Go listen to her podcast. Go subscribe to it. Go read her at Slate. Buy her book and support her. All the names of the organizations she mentioned, I'll put them in the show notes. I also posted that interview on YouTube. Go watch it and subscribe to my YouTube channel while you're there. That would be huge. YouTube.com/standupwithpete. That's linked in the show notes as well. That's it. That's what I've got for you today. Looking forward to being back here with you tomorrow. I'll see you at our Thursday night hangout and anytime on the Discord platform, which is a private chat platform where you can meet, network, connect with people from the stand-up community. Go download the app and join our Discord. There's information how to do that. That way you'll never be alone. Be around like-minded people. We had almost 75 people last night at a hangout. We need each other. We need community. So go sign up for the Discord, and you can get that anytime you want through our community and many others as well. All right, John Carroll is a very valued member of our community. JohnCarroll.org is his website. Go pay for his music. He writes and performs all of it for us. And I'll talk to you tomorrow, you bumblebees.
Your